Vidhammer Fantasy.
Welcome back to Vidhammer. This is Spudlow, and in this video we'll be covering a first round matchup at the Darside Comics tournament in Sarasota in June of 2012. This is a 2,150 point matchup between the Beastmen and the Vampire Counts armies using the 8th edition rules. The scenario being played is a battle line variation with an additional scenario rule involving an 18-inch square zone in the middle of the board. At the end of the 6th turn, any units or characters in the zone get half of their value added to that army's victory points. The Vampire Counts win the roll for board edge and elect to set up on the right side of the screen. They start with a unit of 55 skeletons with spears, and the Beastmen follow with 5 razor gores. Then 55 more skeletons with spears, and 5 more razor gores, followed by 6 crypt horrors. The Beastmen make a late placement of a shard of the Herdstone, and then their normal placement of 41 gores with 2 hand weapons. Then 6 more crypt horrors, 42 gores with 2 hand weapons, 2 bat swarms, and 41 more gores with 2 hand weapons. The vampires put another unit of 2 bat swarms as the Beastmen place their characters, consisting of a Beast Lord General and a Wargord BSB that both go in the central gores, a Great Bray Shaman that goes in the lower gores, and 3 level 1 Bray Shaman that set up camp behind the Herdstone. The vampires make their final placement of a Mortis Engine, followed by their characters of a Strigoi Ghoul King General and a level 2 vampire that go with the blue skeletons. For spell generation, the vampire Strigoi Ghoul King gets Dance Macabre, while the level 2 vampire gets Dance Macabre and Invocation of Nehek. For the Beastmen, all 3 Bray Shaman take Wyson's Wild Form, and the Great Bray Shaman ends up with Melkoth's Mystifying Miasma, Pit of Shades, the Withering, and Occam's Mindrazor. The Beastmen win the first turn roll and move up their battle line, tempting the bat swarms with their razor gores. Winds of Magic and Channeling gives the Beastmen 5 power dice against 5 dispel dice, and each of the Beastmen's casters picks up an extra die for being within 6 inches of the Herdstone. They use 4 dice to cast Pit of Shades on the crypt horrors that the vampires are unable to dispel. The template gets a direct hit and takes out 3 crypt horrors. They use their remaining 5 dice to cast the Withering at the higher level on the upper crypt horrors to lower their toughness by 2. For the vampires' turn, the battle line moves up, maneuvering around the houses, and the Mortis Engine gets a 10-inch buff range on the vampire troops, giving them +1 to regeneration saves. For magic, the vampires get 7 power dice against 4 dispel dice. They use 4 dice to attempt Dance Macabre, but it gets dispelled. They use their final 3 dice to dispel the Withering from their upper crypt horrors. On the second turn, the Beastmen march their lower razor gores out of range, then make a late charge of the upper razor gores on the upper bat swarm, while the rest of the line positions. After Winds of Magic, Channeling, and Herdstoning, the Beastmen get 12 power dice against 6 dispel dice. They use 5 dice to attempt Pit of Shades on the Mortis Engine. Since it doesn't have an initiative value, it would automatically fail and be removed, so the vampires use all of their dice to dispel it. The Beastmen use their next 2 dice to cast Melkoth's Miasma on the upper crypt horrors to reduce their weapon skill by 1. Then they use 4 dice to cast the Withering on the same crypt horrors to reduce their toughness by 3. And they use their last 2 dice to attempt Wyson's Wild Form on the central gores, but the spell fails. In combat, the Bat Swarm's aura makes the Razor Gores always strikes last. The bats hit for 1 wound. The Razor Gores pass their fear check to avoid weapon skill 1, and then hit for 1 wound as well. They give the bats +1 for the high ground, making the combat a push. The Vampire Counts start their turn charging the lower Razor Gores with their bat swarms. The upper Crypt Horrors charge the Razor Gores, and both skeleton units charge the central gores, but the blue skeletons change their minds. The Mortis engine gets a 5-inch buff range as it moves up, and the lower crypt horrors come around the house. Winds of Magic gives the vampires 7 power dice against 4 dispel dice. They use 4 dice to attempt Dance Macabre, but it gets dispelled. They use their 3 remaining dice to cast Invocation of Nehek to bring back a crypt horror from the lower unit. In the upper combat, the crypt horrors decimate the razor gores, restrain from overrunning, and reform to face the gores. In the central combat, the gores pass their fear check and their primal fury check to let them re-roll misses this round. The Beastmen get 15 wounds on the skeletons, who hit back for 7. The skeletons lose the combat, and 8 more crumble. In the lower combat, the bats take out 3 razor gores who fail to wound. They fail their break test and run off the board as the bats turn towards the battle. On the third turn, the upper gores charge the bats and crypt horrors. The shaman horde dances around their lovely herdstone, and the lower gores angle down. Winds of Magic and Hurting gives the Beastmen 12 power dice against 7 dispel dice. They use 5 dice to cast Pit of Shades on the Mortis engine, which the vampires don't attempt to dispel, but the template drifts and fails to hit anything. They use 3 dice to cast Wyson's Wild Form on the lower gores, which the vampires try to dispel but come up short. The Beastmen use 3 more dice for another attempt at Wyson's on the central gores, but this one gets dispelled, and they use their final die to attempt Melkoth's on the upper crypt horrors, but the spell fails. In the upper close combat, the gores pass their fear check and pass their primal fury as well. The crypt horrors and bats kill 6 gores who take out both bat swarms, and since the crypt horrors still had a lingering effect of the withering, they take 7 from the gores, who win the combat by enough to finish off the unit in Crumblin'. The central gores pass fear and primal fury checks and put 19 wounds on the skeletons, who manage to kill 2 gores before they go back to sleep. On the vampire's turn, the crypt horrors and blue skeletons charge the lower gores. The bats move up. The Mortis engine gets a 12-inch range for the regen buff and moves in range of the crypt horrors. Winds of Magic and Channeling gives the vampires 6 power dice against 5 dispel dice. They use 4 dice to attempt Dance Macabre at the higher level, but fail by 1, and their final spell gets dispelled before it's even cast. In close combat, the gores pass their fear check at a -1 thanks to the vampire's aura of dark majesty, and they pass their primal fury check as well. Despite the gore's toughness of 5, the Strigoi Ghoul King kills 5 gores and the vampires get 2 more. The gores take out 1 crypt horror and 12 skeletons, while the skeletons only manage 3 against the toughness 5 gores, and the crypt horrors get 2 more. After tallies, the combat turns out a draw, and neither side attempts a reform. On the 4th turn, the Beastmen charge the blue skeleton's flank with their central gores. There's a late action of a forgotten attack in combat, taking out 4 more gores, but no break test was taken for the Beastmen. The upper gores come around the house as they head into the magic phase with 8 power dice against 2 dispel dice. They use 4 dice to cast the withering on the crypt horrors to lower their toughness by 2, and they use their last 4 dice for Wyson's Wild Form on the lower gores. In combat, both gores pass their fear and primal fury checks. The Strigoi issues a challenge that the Wargore BSB accepts. The Strigoi gets a wound on the Wargore, who gets 3 hits in return, but fails to wound. In normal combat, the Vampire takes out a Gore, the Bestigore General kills 5 skeletons, and the flanking Gores get 3. The frontal Gores put 1 wound on the Crypt Horrors and 5 on the Skeletons, who take out 2 Gores, and the Crypt Horrors get 4 more. The Vampires lose the combat and 12 Skeletons, as the Crypt Horrors decide it's just too horrible for them. The Vampires bring their bats into the fray as the Mortis engine gets an 11-inch aura range as it moves behind the central Gores. They remember an aspect of the aura at this point that damages enemy units inside of it, and the aura takes out 6 Gores from the central melee, but everyone forgets about the unit hiding behind the house. For shooting, the Mortis engine screams and 1 Gore faints. In close combat, both Gore units pass their Fear and Primal Fury rolls again. The challenge continues with the Strigoi putting a wound on the Wargore, who saves it and actually puts 1 back on the Strigoi. The Vampire takes out 6 Gores, the Bestigore gets 3 Skeletons, the flanking Gores get 5, the Bat Swarms fail to wound, and the Skeletons get 1, while the frontal Gores finish the Skeletons and put 3 on the Bats, as they call the game. The Beastmen picked up the victory, having passed every Fear and Primal Fury check in the game. Thanks for watching this battle report. Be sure and check back for new videos each week. Do us a favor and subscribe, like the video if you want to see more, and send us a message if you have any tactics or matchups you'd like to see. Till next time, for the Vidhammer crew, keep fighting.